the last few weeks, they've been tough. I haven't said that in the media. I've done a lot of media in the last few weeks, but I haven't said that. It's very tough. But you summon, and this is the message I guess I was talking about before. You summon everything you've got, and you think about, what did my parents teach me? What did I learn growing up? What did Kokoda teach me again? Remind me of. I don't want our viewers to despair. I want people to understand there are solutions to these things. And as a politician, and as someone who wants to be the Premier of Victoria after November 2026, it's about saying, look, things are bad, and they are. Things are bad in Victoria, but we can fix them. There's a way out. There's hope. There's a vision. There's light at the end of the tunnel.
Okay, are you ready for a different episode? We've never had this in 4.5 years on the dos&d show. Are you excited?
I'm really looking forward to it.
Let's welcome a very special guest, John Pesutto. Welcome to the dos&d show.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Love it. And we were me and Dee were discussing previously. Last night we were preparing for this interview, John. We're going, where are we going to go? And we'll preface it by saying, firstly, we are naive, we are raw. We've never had someone of your caliber in this niche before. So for us, we can't wait to just attack this with curiosity and have an open-ended conversation, aren't we?
Absolutely. We said to you, we're not the ABC, so we'll get that off, as a starting point, and we're very excited to hopefully, I don't want to say dumb it down, but from people like us that probably represent quite a large portion of the population, we want to just cover a few things that are topical that we'd like clearing up on. But before we get into all that, we want to hear a little bit about your background. So tell us, how did you even get into this world?
Well, guys, thank you for having me on, and I hope I don't ruin it for future politicians who might come onto your show, but it's an absolute delight to be here. And, for me, it's a long journey. So I grew up in country Victoria. My parents came out from Italy as migrants, typical migrant story with nothing, very little education. One of 5 kids, so Italian background. My parents came from Italy, and grew up in the in the country. It was great childhood, loving family, but it was some tough times we went through. And I still remember as a kid, Dad losing his job a couple of times due to restructuring of the electricity industry down in the Latrobe Valley. So I grew up with that kind of humility that life can throw things at you, and I learned off my mum and dad in particular, but my whole family and the environment in which I grew up in, that no matter what life throws at you, you just got to keep going, and you've got to be resilient. And I say that because that's been a very big part of my political journey. So I developed a love and a passion for government and policy and politics at a very young age. So I think I was about 15 or 16 when I really started to get involved and started to read about it and studied it at school a lot more. And as soon as I finished university, because I came to Melbourne to study law and commerce, which I wanted to do because I wanted to go into public life at some point. I started my political journey. So, very humble background. Did all the things you'd expect in a regional town. Played, cricket, soccer. Was pretty active. Wasn't always the best student, I have to say. So there's a bit of detention there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Some near misses.
Oh, right. Okay.
If I can put it.
Well, you're one of 3. You're one of 3 of us that are the same.
We're all the same.
So it was. But I'd say this. Growing up in those humble circumstances, it really gave me a sense of be thankful for what you got and don't whinge. Don't ever spend your life whinging and dwelling on things. If you got legs, run, walk. If you got lungs, breathe, move forward. If your mind works, just keep thinking about what's next, what's the next big mountain to climb, and just keep on that journey. And actually learnt that, particularly from my folks, but just even in the environment in which I grew up, because it was a very, I use the term working class. I don't read too much into it, other than, people worked hard, manual jobs. Mum worked in a shoe factory in Traralgon, and Dad, as I said, was a sparky. So, I learnt that humility and just keep going and don't ever whinge. Just work with what you got, look at what you got, and just say, okay, how do I move forward with everything I've got?
How many siblings do you have?
4.
What do they do? So you're in the space you're in. Your parents did what they did. What do your siblings do?
Yeah, they're normal. They're normal. One works in advertising, got his own advertising business. Another works at a large manufacturing company in-house. Another one works at a school. Another one's in funds management. So they're all happy, settled. I sort of became the odd one out and just had this love of of politics and just went on. But they've been a terrific support because throughout my journey, it took me a long time to get into Parliament and many failures before I won. So I often talk to school groups when I love going to schools. I think every politician does. It's one of the most enjoyable things you can do as a politician when you go and visit your local schools. And sometimes I have to admit it feels like I'm freaking the kids out because I've got this whole resilience piece that I talk about. And I talk about, I ran for my first go and I lost, and I ran for my second go and I lost, I ran for my third go and I lost, I ran for my fourth go, and guess what happened? I lost. And they're going, where's this story going? And then I say, I won on my fifth go. And then I ran again for re-election and I lost. And so they're thinking, where's this all going? And then I say, well, on my seventh go, I ran again and I won one election to go back into the Parliament in 2022. And then I ran for leader. And so I say things are never as good or as bad as they seem, in the sense that, always be humble when things are going well, but never despair when they're not. You can turn things around. It's the things I spoke about earlier, where don't despair. I know that's our tendency, but I say that to students because I want them to know, in a world where, the choices are boundless, the apprehension that I know many young people feel when they're looking at, stepping into the world on their own terms, particularly when they leave secondary school. But even before that, they might be apprehensive about what's in store for me. What are my opportunities? Where my place in the world? And so that thing I talk about is very important. It's not just a bit of fun to shock them into, you can lose but still win in the end. But it's also about, you're stronger than you know. You're more resilient than you think. And the only thing they've got to remember is that there's a lot of love and support around them. Even if they come from a broken home where they might not have stability in their lives, or they've grown up with abuse of any, all manner of forms. If you can get to every child and young person growing up that there's support around you, dream big and don't despair that you can't have a go. Because growing up in Traralgon, a great town where I was born and grew up, if you'd asked me when I was 15 or 16, I'd be sitting here as alternative premier, I'd say, I don't know about that. Yeah. But it can happen in this country.
I still remember being at school and having them come into our school.
Yeah,
do you remember that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It was always a thrill. Yeah. But I'm interested, John. Like, we're going to talk about the current political landscape shortly, and it seems, we're saying we're quite naive, but especially in our lifetime, it's never seemed so divided across pretty much the whole world. But if you go back to your 16-year-old self that you said when you started to get interest in it, were you a fired up young man? Were you a person that was marching? Were you angry? Did you want to make change? Were you one of those kind of political people, or was that not in your radar? You just had a broader interest? Yeah,
a very broad and a very deep interest. Yeah. I loved ideas. I loved philosophy when I was a student. Even before I went to university, even as a teenager, I just got engrossed in the debates around when I was growing up in the 80s and coming of age in the 80s. The nuclear debate was ever present. So it was a real thing, and there were, real apprehension across the community about what this meant, and how world stability and global equilibrium could be achieved, so that we didn't end up with an outbreak of hostilities that could be catastrophic. So for me, it was a deep passion. I'd have to say, guys, I've never been angry.
Yeah,
I find that for me is, I can understand it's a very strong impulse for many people, and there are people who are drawn to politics because of a deep-seated grievance around, and that's fine. I'm not saying it's a good or a bad thing. It's just not my bag.
Yes.
What really got me passionate was how ideas shape people's lives, and how you, as a leader, when you get to that position, how you want to implement that to improve living standards for the people you serve. So for me, it wasn't about anger. It was just about more passion than anything else.
So in your eyes, I guess currently, it seems like when you're talking about the schools, a big part of your passion is the next generation, like trying to impact, I don't want to say ingrain or get in the heads, but try and get front of mind in front of the next generation to understand that this is the way.
Yeah.
Would that be like one of the biggest motivators for you, the next generation?
Oh, absolutely. And we debate policy issues every day, and they're very important. In terms of longer term legacy pieces for me, I've always wanted to be an advocate for civil debate Debate should be robust. But I don't want people to be alienated by politics, because sometimes the polarity of politics, that side and this side, and going at each other with real vehemence, a real, sometimes malice, that doesn't work for me. And I think what it does is it alienates a lot of people, particularly young people, but people across the board. One of the messages I really try to impart to young people is, politics doesn't have to be the way, but it's always had that tension. You could go back to ancient times when democracy was first being debated in ancient Greece and in the earliest civilizations that adopted the idea of mandates from the people was this idea that, there were some people who wanted to fire people up and appeal to their worst instincts. And then there were what I would admire is those types of leaders that actually inspire people, not move them by fear. A bit like what Abraham Lincoln spoke about when he talked about appealing to the better angels of our nature, which is try and get the best out of people and bring people together. That's not always easy, because I get politics. Politics in some ways is described as a contact sport. So there's that kind of clashing characteristic of politics, but I don't believe it always has to be like that. And I want young people in particular, when I'm going to schools, the first thing I say to them is everybody can be a leader. And leadership for me is not just about the role you occupy. I often say to young students, leadership is more about the role you play. You don't have to be the captain to be a leader. Or you can be more of a leader than the captain by the way you inspire your teammates and the way you support them when times are really difficult. That for me is really important, because a lot of people who could be really effective in public life, I've suspected over my long journey, the arc and span of a career, that there are people who look at it and think, I could never be a leader, so I'm not going to be politics, or maybe I don't fit the stereotype of what a politician should look like. And that is so wrong. And I try to say to students that all of you have got it. If you care about the world, if you care about the person sitting next to you, you can be a leader. You don't have to be captain or the leader, but you can lead.
Yes. So where do you think it's all started with this whole, a lot of people identify themselves now as left or right or far left or far right. There's this whole ideology behind it. And then with that comes this whole, like you mentioned, it's people get fired up. It happens online. I mean, we put a video out. If we put a video on our socials that pushes one way or the other, just because of what the guest is saying, straight away, fights in the comments. Yeah. So where has this all come from? If you could pinpoint going back, because it just doesn't seem to have always been this way. Is it the Trump era that started this? Is it prior to that? Why? How can we move past that?
Yeah, look, it's a debate that's often had. Where I fall on the debate, and there are different views, right? My view's always been that there's a word called demagoguery, and what it means is an old Greek word, but it means from those earliest times people who want to fire the place up and push people apart. Yeah. And you do it by using inflated language, and not actually language that is reasoned and compelling and calm, but designed to, what I said before, appeal to the worst nature of people. That's what demagoguery means. That's always, for my part, I've always thought that's always been a part of political debate and discourse in our life. From the moment the printing press was invented, people started printing pamphlets and libelling each other and being really awful to each other. It's not new. What I think's happened though, guys, is I think social media has amplified it. So now everybody has a microphone, and everybody has a platform if they want it. And one of the best things I did recently was just stop looking at a lot of social media, because it does do that. I think though, to your question, D, is there's a real responsibility on political leaders, in my view, to be measured, passionate. I'm a very passionate person, I hope you can probably see.
Yeah, love
it. But you've also got to be tempered and engaging and measured. Now, not every politician is going to do that. There are some politicians who have a business model where it is to fire people up. Mm-hmm. And I remember there was an issue. It doesn't so much matter what the issue was, but I took a position on an issue. Yeah. And a person contacted me and said, well, you took that position, but you didn't seem very convinced by it. And I said, but I stated clearly what my position was. Yeah. And we had a debate, because I said, what you want me to do is you want me to state that position, but be angry about it. I don't do anger. Anger's not a part of what I do. I'm trying to be the alternative, be the premier. I'm the alternative premier right now. I want to instill in the people I'm trying to convince to support my colleagues and I that I can be relied upon. I'm a calm, safe pair of hands.
Yes.
That sort of political style doesn't work for me, but I know that happens a lot, and social media's been an outlet for that. And in that sense, it's been extremely destructive of the nature of public debate. So, you know, I've had a lot of opportunities while being leader to talk about how it's important in our debate to be passionate, to be robust, for sure. But don't dehumanise people you disagree with.
Yes.
Don't malign them. You don't need to do that. You don't have to get angry about it. Engage people, and that's the best way to win them.
Well, it's heating up with John Pesutto in a good way. What a great man he is, and so lucky to have him with us. But what do we need to do now?
Well, we are going to shortly talk about the whole situation in Victoria with the roads, tunnels and bridges. But all those sort of things, they just don't get done without our good friends at Fleet Plan Hire Solutions, the very best in the business. Dos, they're the ones to call, aren't they, for all your earth-moving needs?
They head to fbh.com.au to find out more info today.
Back to the episode with the great John Pesutto.
You mentioned Trump before. What I'm interested is that obviously the election's coming up next month, and what it means for us. And here in Australia, again, you know, there's probably a lot of people listening that have no idea what it means for any of us. And that was something I wanted to ask you from your perspective is, what does that whole thing mean to us here in Australia?
Yeah, the US election. So look, I think
should we care about it? Because I know there's a lot of people, particularly in our generation, they go, "Oh, I'm not even going to take any interest because I don't need to. It's not our country. I don't need to know." Yeah.
Look, I think there's a few lessons out of it, Dos. I think the thing I'd say at the top is that American politics, which I've always been, you know, a passionate follower of American politics and history. It's one of the reasons I sort of got interested in it all. But US politics is different, and society in the United States is different. We have a lot of similarities with the United States, but many important differences as well. A few things to back that up. First of all, in Australia, our democracy, I think, is a bit more equitable. And what I mean by that is it's easier to participate in politics in Australia because you don't need truckloads of money to run. You don't need truckloads of money to participate. In the United States, if you want to run for office, it costs a bomb. Like, you need a lot of money to run. That excludes hundreds of millions of Americans. That's not the case here. We have an equitable, sort of flatter system that doesn't require that. Secondly, in the United States, it's not compulsory to vote. So that apathy, which is common across the world, it's not unique to the United States, but that apathy means that in order to get people out to vote, you've got to do what I was talking about before. Divide, polarise, get people angry, motivated, so they go and vote. Here you don't need to do that. We've got a really unique advantage in Australia where, as political figures, myself and my counterparts, we don't need to go out there and do that. We can argue our case, make it compelling, yes, criticise each other's policies because, frankly, we do disagree with each other's policies and that's legitimate. But we don't have to polarise to get the vote out. And you'll often hear that when you're debating, following the debates in the United States. Third point I'd make is, for Australians, the outcome of the United States election, I don't think is going to be life-changing for us. I think the relationship that we have with the United States is pretty stable no matter who gets in. Look, I'll be upfront, I think I've said this before, I'm not a huge fan of Donald Trump, but I don't think that were he to succeed, it will mean much for us. So what I'd say to young people is, if they are following it, I think the important reflections I'd offer them is that let's be thankful for what we got here. And understand that what you see in the United States is not what you experience here. You've got a democracy that's yours to participate in if you want to. And for everybody who'll watch this particular conversation we're having now, you know, if there's one takeout in this, is you've got a democracy where you can get involved in local government, state or federal government elections or any issue, and you don't need a lot of money. You just need the passion in your soul to do it.
It's funny because I remember one of the first times I ever voted as probably an 18-year-old, I was standing in line and the people around me, they're all whinging about voting. Oh, we have to go and vote. We have to go and vote. And I just remember back then I was even more naive than I am now, but I remember thinking, I'm so grateful that we actually have to go and do this. Like we're lucky that we even get the opportunity to cast a vote. Do you remember your reaction when there was the assassination attempt on Donald Trump? And what does that do? What emotion does that ignite in you? How do you feel when you see something like that happen? Does it fill you with fear or confusion? What were you thinking?
I was sad. That's the first impulse. I was sad that that was happening. It's not new to American politics, sadly.
Yes.
Several presidents have been killed at the hand of assassins, other political figures. In the United Kingdom, we've had some people killed as well. It's an ever-present danger. The other sadness about that was that, although it's not surprising, there are homicides due to gun use and firearms use in the United States every day, and multiple. It's terribly sad, but it's also another difference between us and the United States. The United States was a great country, but founded on revolution, and that revolution largely centered around the use of firearms to defend themselves against what they saw as a tyrannical government in the United Kingdom under King George way back when, right? So they have this culture where I don't get it, and I don't think we get it as Australians, but the way revolutionary zeal helped form the United States, for all of its great strengths and virtues, a bastion of democracy. Not a perfect democracy, but a great bastion of democracy. It's also meant that embedded in their culture is an attachment to firearms that we would never, ever embrace here. And so they can't change things. I went to the United States some years ago when I was Shadow Attorney General to look at their justice system and how we could reform criminal justice. And I came away thinking, wow. I remember having a dinner with Republicans and Democrats in Texas. And I remember at one point, I didn't know what I was in for. I said to them, how likely is gun reform in the United States? They all jumped on me like a scrum. And I thought, that was a bad one. Because for them, culturally, their guns are really... So the prevalence of gun use over there is just... It's heartbreaking to watch, and they can't change it.
Yes.
It's in their constitution, the Second Amendment. Thankfully, you go back many years, probably before you were born, in 1996, when...
we were there.
We were just there.
Well, Prime Minister John Howard brought in those gun reforms. So that's a long answer. I'm sorry for the long answer, but there's a lot behind it, that question. And I was sad that... And it goes back to that point before about you don't need to do that in a democracy.
Yes.
Democracy's built to take into account all the tensions that come from disagreement, but harming each other physically is not part of it.
Yeah. What's your this is probably going a little bit off topic. What's your day in the life kind of at the moment? Because it's pretty hectic schedule for you these days. I'm keen to know how you balance, you've been in the news a lot lately, your mental health, everything else with it. How are you going with balancing everything?
Oh, it's just I'll answer the question this way. I did because it's timely. I did Kokoda.
Great. I've done it too.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Well, you know exactly what I'm talking. The first few days I'm thinking, what have I done? I can't finish this. This is just, I can't do these mountains. However many mountains we're doing a day, and in these kids, am I up to this physically? Can my knees hold out? And you just keep doing it. And the lessons that I took out of Kokoda, which I've been thinking about a lot in recent weeks, is how when you're doing it, have you done it?
No,
you should do it.
I keep saying I would.
But some of the things I remember most about Kokoda, every single step you must concentrate. And how many steps would you take? Hundreds of thousands of steps over the course of an 8-day hike or 9-day hike. You cannot take your eye off every step. Even when it's flat, the roots, which are, very gnarly roots, you could trip, right? You could slip, you could fall. Any number of things. You have to concentrate on every step. And then you look at a hill and you think, how am I going to do that hill? My knees but you make the hill, and then you think you've made the top of the hill, and then you look up and there's another bit of the hill, and then there's another bit of the hill, and you're getting really frustrated. But what you realise after a few days, I don't know if you had this experience, Josh, but after a few days I thought, I now get this. I've reminded about something we should know. It's one step at a time, one hill at a time. You don't have to complete Kokoda in one day. Patience, each step. And so when you ask me about, the last few weeks, they've been tough. I haven't said that in the media. I've done a lot of media in the last few weeks, but I haven't said that. It's very tough. But it's when you're going through something like that, and it is tough. I had to go through 4 days of cross-examination.
Yes.
At the same time, I'm trying to do my work as opposition leader. Not easy. Not easy on my wife, who was at court with me, or the family more broadly. But you summon, and this is the message I guess I was talking about before. You summon everything you've got, and you think about, what did my parents teach me? What did I learn growing up? What did Kokoda teach me again? Remind me of? One step at a time. It's one day. And sometimes, you know, when you're talking to particularly young people who are, for one reason or another, feeling the stresses of studies, or you're trying to find a job, or trying to find access to some kind of assistance, whether it's mental health or drug and alcohol support or anything like that, you don't have to climb the whole mountain right now. You just need to, right now, what you need to do is put your right foot in front of your left foot. And then once you've done that, put your left foot in front of your right foot. That's all you need to do. And just do that. And then before you know it, you'll be scaling whatever mountain it is you've got to scale. And I know that sounds simplistic, but it's the truth.
Yeah.
It's the truth. And that's what gets you through. So I feel a sense of purpose in my job and a responsibility. And I've said that, and I'm happy to say it here. I don't do this for the sake of victory. And this is a message I have to I instill in my team and my political party is victory is not winning the election. Victory is good government. So I want to instill this idea that it's the responsibility you have, not the glory of winning. There's no glory in winning if you stuff up and don't deliver on what you said you would do in government to be a good government. So all of those tribulations, those challenges, all of that adversity, if you call it, they're just things, they're hills. And so I have this, I haven't said this publicly, but I have this code word now, which I share with the people I did Kokoda with. And whenever there's a tough moment coming up, we text each other. It's like, Kokoda, you know. And that for me has become a real mantra now.
Yeah.
And I don't make light. I mean, Kokoda is a holy, hallowed trail, as you know. And when you go to the memorial at Saravi, I mean, it's
very emotional.
Yeah. Oh, it is.
Yeah.
And I don't have immediate descendants. And I wondered when I went there, you know, how would I connect with Kokoda not having had relatives who'd served there? Because my parents grew up were in Europe. But you find a way to connect. It was about it's not the direct ancestral link to those who served and died and survived and suffered the wounds emotional that came with that. It's more, what did they die for? That's the connection. What did they serve for? Freedom.
It's your message has been really, really, truly inspiring over the last few weeks. So we want to commend you on that too, because I don't think, no matter, as a human, regardless of where your political leanings are for anybody listening or watching, I'm sure they would, you know, everyone has to admire how you're handling yourself. And you bring up a really interesting point about Kokoda, because one of the most interesting and fascinating interviews I ever heard was about an astronaut that went to space, and he basically said every politician that ever has any duty of serving their country needs to experience this, because when you go into space and you look down on Earth, you see how close every country actually is together. Like, we're actually all in this together rather than divide and conquer. So my question's a bit strange, but obviously a lot to do with the media is fearmongering, and we deal with that all the time. When it comes to foreign threats and wars and all these things that are always perceived in the media, how much should we actually, as just everyday Australians or everyday Victorians, actually worry about these sorts of things that are going on?
Yeah, look, I know it can be quite unsettling when you see the violence that erupts at any given time around the world. A point I often make when I'm speaking, particularly at citizenship ceremonies, I say this a lot, but we have a responsibility as a people to remember that one of the best and most important things we can do is prove to the world over that democracy works and that diversity works. Because you think about it, right? We often forget what a miracle. Well, I say miracle, but it's not really a miracle. It's the product of what we believe in and the work we've put in. But what an amazing achievement Australia is when you think about it. We have just about every part of the world is represented here. And we're a very egalitarian people, very egalitarian country. We're not perfect, but I don't know of any country that could claim a closer correspondence with the principles of equality and access that we do. We have a health system which, despite the debates, is one of the most accessible in the world.
Absolutely.
You don't have to be a millionaire to get decent healthcare.
I mean, he had to wait a while for his hernia.
I mean, we've got our criticism of the way the health system is managed. But
there are loopholes for everyone listening, by the way. You can fix that a bit earlier.
You know people.
Yeah.
But the point, I'm sort of taking a wide berth to an important question, which is we can help in a number of ways. Some people help more directly, and the Australian Defence Forces and our diplomatic services and our general posture on foreign policy is very cooperative. We try to assist in peace measures around the world, and there are Australians who've served and died in the cause of that. But I make this point that, and it goes to some of the things we were talking about before, that the rest of the world looks at countries like ours and draws hope from that in their country, one day they might realise a democratic paradise. Now, again, I'm not suggesting that our democracy is perfect. We can always try to improve it. But, at any one time, there are hundreds of millions of people who would just give anything to have the ability to fill out a ballot and do it freely without fear of retribution from a dictatorship. So that's a responsibility we have, and something that ought to make us humble, that we've got something great. Let's always work at that, because you think about what we've done. We've brought so many cultures together, and we allow people to practice their cultural customs and traditions, worship whatever gods they want to worship, all within the law. But you know what I mean? There's a lot of freedom and scope there. And when you think about it, that's a pretty amazing thing when you look at different parts of the world where people can't even live together because of religious differences or political differences. So we have that responsibility. And so I don't want people watching to feel like you've got to despair at that. The best thing we can do is make the most of our democratic freedoms. And if people want to assist, we've got a great tradition of that as well.
Can I ask a more direct question then? Because, for like all the guys in the room here, like we're all in our 20s, right? So we look at, and I do say that because Josh was giving us a couple of extra years before. But like, if we read the news and do we, in all seriousness, should we worry about threats from China, for example? Is that something we should think about and worry about?
I don't think so. I think that the Australian governments and governments over time, I'm confident will manage that. I think we've got to have a relationship with all countries in our region and countries around the world, and particularly those closest to us. I don't fret about it. I think Australia will take whatever steps it needs to where security issues are concerned. But we also have to understand that we rely on our relationships with countries in the region for a whole lot of reasons, not just bilateral trade, and we have an enormous trading relationship with countries like China and India in particular, but other countries in the region. We've got to manage those, and we don't want to jeopardise those because Australian jobs depend on them.
Of course.
So we've got to do that. So I don't fret about that. Every country will have to manage its security arrangements. So I wouldn't want anyone watching to feel like you've got to worry about that.
Yes.
I think we'll have that in train, and governments over time will manage that. I'm confident. But, embrace it. Embrace the diversity.
I always personally, I always worry about freedom. That's something that's important to me. So I always worry about exactly what you just said a moment ago about the freedom we have to live a life that we basically choose, do what we want to do.
Well, even just experiencing that slight loss of freedom during that whole COVID stage was just excruciating. Like that touch of loss of freedom probably, gave everyone the appreciation of just being able to have that freedom. I didn't realise how good that was. Yeah. D makes a good point. Freedom's probably the most important thing for us in our generation. Yeah.
And we're used to having it. So when it's incumbent in that way, as it was during COVID, and I had my own views about how draconian, harsh some of those lockdowns were.
Were you happy to share some of them?
Yeah, I thought it was really unfair that some sectors were allowed to operate but others weren't. My view at the time was, and it still is, looking back, that there were many sectors. I mean, I thought that there was no reason why businesses had to shut. For example, construction was allowed to operate, and I didn't have a problem with that. But my view was, if construction as a sector can continue to operate, why can't retail with COVID-safe measures, You know, there were things you could do. And I argued at the time, I used to write columns and do a lot of media in that period. They were my wilderness years where I'd lost before I came back, the wilderness years. And I remember writing a column. I made a point about this, that, you know, surely there's got to be ways where we can help people to operate. But, you know, I think you touched on mental health before for people, and the mental health effects were, I think, delayed for many people. Some felt it immediately, but for many people it was obviously delayed. And it just was a reminder, certainly for people like myself, but it should be a reminder for all politicians, that do not tamper with people's freedoms lightly, ever. Because, you know, there was an argument at the time that, and it wasn't an unreasonable argument. We were grappling with something we didn't really know. We did come to have an appreciation of it over time, but when it first hit, we didn't know. So there was this kind of public health response, which was, oh, we don't want people to die because of COVID, so we'll shut everything down effectively.
Yes.
But they forgot that equally there's another risk. On the flip side, you shut people down and lock them down, there are just as serious consequences that flow from that. So you have to be sensible about it. And that was a huge miscalculation from government. I would argue here in Victoria we got that very wrong.
Yeah.
But I would cut a bit of slack early on, in the early weeks and months of COVID. But the pandemic,
don't get me wrong, early days I loved it.
Yeah.
Like, I thought, gee, this is all right. Like, you know, at the time, genuinely. But then when it went on for as long as it did, that's when it became.
And do you find, guys, that sometimes something will trigger a memory of the worst of the lockdowns, and it just brings it all back?
Definitely.
It's not pleasant.
No,
It
not at
actually
all.
isn't pleasant.
No, not at all.
Well, and one of the issues, and again, I know it's obviously this is touchy subject, but I mean personally, I just disagreed with how ostracized people were from society if you didn't take a vaccine, and a relatively untested or untried or proven thing. So I think that's when you, as a citizen, you feel scared, because now you're being forced to put something into your body, and there's no way out unless you do it. You know, you can't go here, you can't go there, you can't do anything.
Yeah.
That was a struggle personally. I don't know how you felt about that, but that's how we felt.
Yeah, I did a lot of. I was part of the thing I had to do to keep supporting my family financially. I became a lawyer again. I just had my own little legal practice, so I was doing a lot of advice work in this space, and it did seem a bit odd that the way those pandemic orders, which required vaccines to do certain things, seemed to operate in very sort of varying ways and disparate ways, depending on which sector you're in. And I remember thinking it's very unfair to have different rules, which nobody's explained. And one of the things from a democratic perspective during the whole pandemic was, in Victoria, basically the parliament was shut down.
Yeah.
Apart from dealing with some urgent matters, it was shut down. So the idea of debating and contesting ideas was basically non-existent. And that was a dangerous precedent to try to set, and we should never do it again. I think no matter what happens in the future, we should always allow people, through their representatives, but also through the courts if necessary, to contest ideas and not just be told this is how it has to be, and you go and do it.
One thing I really wanted to touch on as well is, well, I'm sure you have your finances sorted at home, but the financial responsibility that comes with the amount of debt that the government currently we have. I mean, I think we were looking at it, it's over $150 billion in debt, and it's getting to, I think they're projecting to over 180 in, I can't remember how many years.
Your numbers are right.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you, like, what does that look like for the everyday person? Like, what does that debt actually mean? Like, how have we got into that amount of debt? And then by, you know, whoever we vote in, how does that debt become? I mean, that's a lot of debt.
We're paying a lot of tax at the moment, John.
And you'll pay more.
Yeah.
Look, so I'm very conscious that I've really enjoyed this being non-partisan type thing. So I'll try and be as non-partisan as I can. But there are differences between the Premier and I. So just in a very sort of brief manner, the debt is blown out because the government has the biggest problem with the debt. It's not the only problem. The biggest problem is these major projects. Now, we need infrastructure built. Right? We need roads and we need public transport built. No one's arguing with that, and I intend to do that in office. But you've got to do it in a sustainable way. So you can't go and buy a property and say, I'm going to build a $4 million house on that property, but I can only really afford a loan of $500,000. but I'm going to do it anyway. So that's what the government's kind of done. It's signed us up to a mortgage it can't afford to pay. So what's happened is the payments now are just blowing out and the debt's blowing out. There's a range of other things that have happened, like the Commonwealth Games cancellation and mismanagement of other projects and programs that have just blown out, in the hundreds of millions of dollars. It's an obscenely high amount of money. But you can fix it all. You can fix it. It's going to take time. We've got to get control of those major projects and make sure we're building things, but doing it in a way which is affordable. Because here's the thing. You can go out and say, we're going to put on a hard hat and a high-vis vest and announce something. But what happens in the end, and we're seeing it now, is that because the debt goes through the roof and our interest payments on that debt also goes through the roof, you have to start cutting, or the government has to start cutting. So what it's doing is it's cutting health. It's cutting education. It's cutting roads. The government is effectively really spending virtually no money repairing our roads around the state. And I'm not sure if you drive across regional Victoria, but the state of the roads is really bad.
Yeah.
So that's the consequence for all Victorians. How much we'll be paying in interest alone on that debt? I'll tell you how high it will be. By 27, 28, that in about 3 years' time, we'll be paying $26 million a day in interest. That's just money going out the door. Now, $26 million is the equivalent of a new school a day. A day. So it's serious. But again, I don't want our viewers to despair. I want people to understand there are solutions to these things. And as a politician and as someone who wants to be the Premier of Victoria after November 2026, it's about saying, look, things are bad, and they are. Things are bad in Victoria, but we can fix them. There's a way out. There's hope. There's a vision. There's light at the end of the tunnel.
We were talking to yesterday, just when we were formalising some ideas about this interview. One thing we're interested in is protesting, right? No matter which side of the fence you're on. What does protesting actually work? So when people, apart from annoying us all, costing us money, shutting down the roads, does it actually send a message through when groups protest about an issue?
Yes.
Okay.
I think protesting can be effective. And it's a very important, in fact, I would argue it's a vital part of democracy.
Okay.
We accept it, protesting. But here's the big qualification. And we're debating this at the moment, so it's a very timely question. Protesting in our democracy, even an advanced democracy like Victoria's and Australia's democracy, doesn't allow you to be violent. Mm-hmm. And that's what's happened in recent months and why we've been debating how we manage protests. I think we all agree that protesting is a part of democratic life. And yeah, protests to some extent are intended to be an inconvenience. I can live with that, right? As a political leader, it's annoying when a road's shut down.
Yeah.
Is the sky going to fall in if somebody protests and they block an intersection for a little bit of time? No, it's not really going to. The sky's not going to fall in. So I don't want that impression to be left with people. But equally, if you have a protest like we did the other week.
Is that just one on the screen there?
That might have been it.
No.
It was it was the land forces. There was a defence force
that was at the exhibition centre.
The exhibition centre. And you had things being thrown at police officers, horse manure thrown at police officers and acid. It was really awful, and violence. That's never acceptable. So it's like anything in life. With every right, and this is the essence of democracy, is with every right comes a responsibility. So this is one thing I've argued throughout my career, that there's a great deal of passion and almost a kind of a romantic sense of protesting, from the 60s even, before any of us were around, I'm happy to say. But, you know that 60s movement kind of culture where, it was peace man and, people were out there. There's a kind of romance to that, right? There's a passion that came with that. And I think part of the legacy of that was that, it's all about protest and the right to voice, your right to express your opinion, which is absolutely true, but it doesn't represent the full picture. The full picture is, you've got a right to speak, but you've got a responsibility to do it in a way which recognises the humanity and dignity of everybody else.
Well, that's always been my question around it, is especially when it comes to how some of the police force are treated. And I've got a family friend that was involved with that last one, and he was in a video, and I saw the video and I couldn't believe the things that were being done to them, and they're trying to, stand their ground, and if they stand their ground too much, then they're looked at as these terrible people,
Villains,
but they're not.
That is spot on, Dos. And for police officers, I feel for, and it's one of the reasons I've actually been saying that we need a better way to manage the right, not limit the right to protest, because you're not limiting it. All you're saying is we want to make sure we put the block for where it becomes violent. So no one can seriously argue you've got the right to vote to protest violently. But when it comes to police officers, they're in a really invidious position because they can so easily be accused of using excessive force when all they're trying to do is keep people safe and protect the community and bystanders and just stop people from injuring each other when you've got warring groups. Because often with protests, you'll know there'll be one group over here and they're clashing with another group, and the poor police officers are in the middle just trying to stop the violence from erupting. So they're trying to manage that where they have to use some level of force, but they're trying to do it proportionately. But it's so easy for somebody to say, you're using excessive force, and then the police officers feel defensive about it. And I really feel for them when they're in that position. And then to think that you've got to go home and you've got children or a partner or someone saying, what's that on your clothing? And I have to tell them.
Yeah, it's funny. It's just the more we talk, it's more I go, thank God this is in America, because you just see some of the things, and then defunding police, and then what happens when police are defunded, and then crime rates go. Like, it's just everything's a knife's edge. What should we actually look for? Is it environment issues? Is it social justice issues? Is it cost of living? Like, where should the majority of Victorians look for when they're actually deciding if they're very 50-50, if they're a swing voter, where should they put their energy towards?
Yeah, look, I think every issue you mention, D, is important. They're all important. There are no unimportant issues for people. If it matters to you, it's important. And it might not be, an issue that's relevant to myself personally living in Campbell might not be the same thing as, John Pesutto, who was living in Traralgon years ago.
Yes.
So they're all important. I think in terms of priorities, and this is where, as political figures, it's our responsibility to make our case about what we think are the most important things to deal with. So I preface the answer I'm about to give by saying it's not that some issues are less important. It's what's more urgent to deal with.
Of course.
So having said that, what I'll be arguing going into the 2026 state election is the cost of living and the growth of our economy is really important. It comes to your point, Dos, about giving people every assistance to try and establish businesses, whether it's small, medium or large, because ultimately our ability, and I think people are now appreciating the link here, if you don't have a strong economy because you've basically as a government not managed projects well and debt so high that you've had to tax people really harshly, which is what's been happening, businesses start to leave. And that's what's happening in Victoria. So you've got a lot of government spending because of blowouts, but you've got businesses not thriving and suffering. So the point I'll be making is, in order to address people's cost of living priorities, a job, meeting their mortgage payments, being able to pay their rates without having to ask for assistance or paying their energy bills, we've got to grow the economy. And once you do that, that supports revenue that the government needs, and then you can fund your hospitals and your roads and your child protection services, your criminal justice reform measures, which we want to focus on, all of those things and many more. You can do that. But if you don't care about promoting the overall prosperity of the state, because it's about trying to grow the state's wealth, not so a precious few can enjoy it, but to grow the state's wealth, so then governments can work with that and say, okay, we'll manage every dollar we raise responsibly to invest it, but otherwise let people enjoy their freedom to live the lives they want to by either running their own business or being an employee, but having a stable job because their employer is not being forced out of business. So for us, it's more about the cost of living side of things. Now, in doing that, all of those other issues you mentioned, decarbonisation of the economy, moving to that transition where we see more renewables come online, that's really important. But you can only do that if you've got strong and competent management of the state's finances. If you don't have that, none of that's going to be possible. You can pretend you're doing it, but as we're seeing, the results aren't there.
And is that probably our current state? Is there, you used the word pretending, has there been probably a lot of pretending like at the forefront rather than deep foundational building a house, doing the block first, and then the nice stuff happens. You start building the actual house and the interior and everything. It looks nice.
Yeah.
Is that probably what has been an issue? The deep foundation is never necessarily focused on first.
Yeah, spot on. So you both actually get it.
Yeah.
I know you opened at the top with you don't, but that is exactly right. You've said it probably better than I've ever said it. It's almost the problem is if you don't have those foundations right, the cracks run amok through the whole system of government in the sense that you have hospitals that are struggling, and the reason why our hospitals are struggling is they're not being funded well. So you have waiting lists that are blowing out. And the government hasn't planned for that. And I'm not trying to be partisan, but I do have to answer the question. In education, just today, my Shadow Minister for Education will go out and talk about the fact that we're paying a fortune for casual relief teachers because there's a teacher shortage crisis in Victoria. Same with Ambulance Victoria. The roads, I've mentioned them already. It all filters through, and my argument would be, and the government can speak for itself, but my argument as Alternative Premier is you're pretending that you're funding these things, but you're actually not. And that's because of those foundations. The foundations in this case are the high taxes, the high debt and the high interest and the mismanagement of a whole range of things. So it does matter, and I'm very keen going into the next state election to draw that link for people that debt might seem like for a lot of our viewers, they might think, well, what does debt matter to me? And I get that. It might seem like a remote figure, but it's actually not. That $26 million a day we'll be paying, everyone will feel that. You feel it everywhere. So for me, it's more that cost of living, getting the economy working again and getting that investment flowing.
Can you maybe explain a little bit deeper? Because I know, so thinking about the foundation, that's great, but I'm also thinking of a younger person, attention spans are short.
Yeah.
And they want to know, they would rather focus on what's going to impact me right here and right now. And if I don't know that, well, I'm probably more asking along the lines of the cost of living thing.
Yeah.
The next state election, with the cost of living currently, like I think about our generation and buying houses and just being able to, put food on the table and families are struggling and whatever else. The next state election, how does it impact that current issue? Like, is that going to change? Is it just going to keep increasing? Is it going to keep becoming more difficult?
Where does it plateau?
Where does it plateau?
Yeah. It will get more difficult. And for a lot of our younger viewers, if you think about it, the high taxes, when I say high taxes, I'm not just using a set of words. It's high taxes does mean that it costs more to buy a house, because the cost of construction today for a new house in Victoria, it's blown out to about 40 to 45% of every new build is just taxes. That's incredibly high compared to other states. Now, we've got to get that figured down, because if you want to buy a house, and I'm sure you do, if you don't already have one, you might want to buy one, you might want to save up for one and have a plan to do that. It's going to take you a lot longer unless we get a change. And even for those who are watching who might not be looking to buy a home anytime soon, but to rent. And I've rented myself in a much younger version of myself. I did rent for a lot of years. Those taxes not only play into higher home prices, those higher taxes produce higher rents. And so I was out doing media last week, and I went out and did one particular day. I was out talking about the fact that, for every rent you pay a bond, right? So there's a record, there's data on how many bonds we have in Victoria, which is a reflection of just how many rental properties there are on the market. Now, we had the biggest single drop in 25 years in the March quarter, so the 3 months to March of this year, in the number of active rental bonds. I mentioned that figure because what that figure represents, just to put it simply, is we don't have as many places available to rent. So not only are rents going up, but rental stock is coming down because a lot of investors are fleeing the market. Why? Because taxes are too high. Why are taxes too high? Because debt's going through the roof and interest is going through the roof. So the government's saying, rather than get our house in order, we'll tax businesses and we'll tax people who have invested in property. We'll tax them more through higher land taxes and higher payroll taxes, and they're big numbers, right? We'll tax them more, but it all feeds through. And who ends up paying? Our viewers, young people who are renting or wanting to buy a home.
Well, Sammy just had a stat up before. I think it was between $1,200 and $1,500 is the average monthly cost for a single person renter, which, like, when we rented together, 2 years ago, we were paying half
Yeah.
of that, which is crazy. So how much of this is to blame because of what happened during COVID?
I would argue a very minimal amount.
Okay.
A very minimal amount, because the debt was already high before then. And the amount of debt that the government, I don't want to get into the weeds too much here,
Sure.
but very briefly, what the government is saying is, all this debt's due to COVID. It's not. A very small proportion of it is due to COVID. The rest of it is due to those blowouts I was talking about before, and things like the Commonwealth Games cancellation, which
How
was
much
just
did that cost us?
Yeah.
the Commonwealth Games.
Yeah.
It cost us at least $600 million. It was a lot of money, but my concern has always been it cost a lot more than that, because what that took into account was only the compensation we paid and some other amounts. It didn't take into account all of the indirect effects of cancelling the games on businesses that had lost money. So there's a broader economic cost.
What does that, like, surely there's also a cost on, like, everyone else's view in the Commonwealth on us now as a nation for this to happen. I know not an actual numbered cost, but on reputation.
Egg on our face, yeah.
Egg on our face. Does that have a pretty bad look on it as well?
Yes.
Yeah.
Massive.
Yeah.
Massive. And that reputational piece, you can't put a number on it. And you can only speculate that how many international organisations, whether sporting bodies or conferences, will now look at Victoria and think you're not a trustworthy place to invest.
Yeah.
So to give you a current example, just today...
Like, I dream of having the FIFA World Cup here one day, right?
Oh, so do I.
And yeah, of course. And I know the Commonwealth Games is a lot smaller than that. I mean, we've got the Olympics coming out, which is great. But yeah, I think about that and I go, does that affect that? You know, one day?
It would.
Yeah.
It would. And you know, I have the dream too of a World Cup final at the MCG. Could you imagine that? Global event. But even today, there's some data out showing that Victoria has slipped, and particularly Melbourne has slipped in hosting conferences and conventions. Now, it might not seem like a huge thing to a lot of our viewers, but when we have international conferences and conventions in Melbourne in particular, but in Victoria as well, when you have those, the multiplier effects are huge. There's accommodation, visitation expenses. You imagine a couple of thousand people coming to Melbourne, it's a big deal, right? So we've slipped. Now, we're now third in the country behind Queensland. So these reputational effects are huge, and you can't put a dollar figure on it necessarily, but it's a brand thing, and you want people to look at Victoria and Melbourne in particular, where we've boasted for many decades about being the major events capital of Australia, and we're going to have to fight hard to keep that.
So if we lost, hypothetically, the Australian Open or the Formula One or the AFL Grand Final, what effect does that have financially on the state?
It would have a huge financial impact on the state. Huge, absolutely. But more broadly, it would be demoralising for the state. And remember, these global events and major events, when you host them as a jurisdiction, they're not bolted down. Even if you sign a contract, they're so big that they can move anywhere. They can relocate if they really want to. And no government's going to take legal action to stop them. So you've got to be as good as your last gig, if you know what I'm saying. You've got to be constantly making it impossible for them to think that another location would be any better than Melbourne or Victoria. And that's something you've got to work at every day.
Yeah, for sure. How are you feeling?
Oh, I've thoroughly enjoyed this,
Me
because
too.
it's probably went different than I maybe anticipated. I've actually just been enjoying. That's what we like about this platform. It's not a 15-second grab.
Yeah.
It's a conversation that hopefully people listen to it as a whole product, because they can hear. What I really admire about you, John, is I like that you're not polarizing. You're not. I expected that a little bit. I expected to kind of target your probably current audience and maybe that 60% that are on the fence. I don't know, but I like that you've. Yeah, I just really admire that. But what we are going to do, we're going to have a little bit of fun.
Yeah, I forgot.
Sammy, can you, Jared, maybe one of you guys bring over the Bayford Ford mystery box. Now, Dos, do you want to introduce this? Because this is brand new for us. John is going to have the first go.
Well, the mystery box itself it's filled with a list of questions, challenges, maybe, I don't want to say games. This is a game itself, but
there are a couple games in there.
You'll put your hand in there, you'll draw one of these questions out, and you're going to give us your best, I reckon.
Okay.
But Dee, you've got a few words to read on behalf of our segment partner, Bayford Ford.
Yeah, so Bayford Ford, the number one dealership in Victoria in 2023, longest running Ford dealer in the country since 1917, DOS. The Bayford dealership was selling Fords before Ford Australia even existed. Now, this is the killer. This is why you want to go to Bayford Ford. They have a cinema. They have a game.
Like a cinema room.
Cinema room.
Wow.
So if you want to go look at the car,
Put the kids in the cinema while you go and...
or the cinema, or even the games room. Oh. How good is that? So we would highly recommend you all to go and have a look at the website, have a look at the Fords on offer, and of course, go visit Bayford Ford Epping. They are fantastic.
Sammy, put that in front of John. And
Thanks, Sammy, and thanks, Bayford Ford.
And Bayford Ford will be sending you home with some goodies too, John.
Okay, yep, all right. So this is a question I have to answer on the spot.
Yeah.
What's one thing that makes you angry that really shouldn't?
Okay. Now, we'll preface this. So we did a segment
a
few weeks ago on our show. Now, we're talking about things. This isn't... It's ironic that you pulled that out as a politician. But we're not talking about deep political
they're not
issues.
all written with that same question, I promise you.
We're talking about things that just, for whatever reason, they just annoy you. They get under your
What
skin.
were some examples we gave out?
Oh gosh, on the spot. Well, obviously road rage is the typical one for most people. It's that. Actually, you know what it was for me? It's slow walkers. When I'm walking down the street and I got to get somewhere fast, and people walking 2 or 3 abreast, and I can't get past, and I don't want to startle them. That frustrates me. That was my one.
Yeah.
So that might hopefully help you a little bit.
Well, I was thinking of a road one because they're usually the easiest
Yeah.
one.
They
I've got others if it's no good. I've got others.
Give us a few.
Give us a few, yeah.
Okay, in the road one, you know what really annoys me?
What?
When there's traffic's banked up and everybody's just waiting to go, and everybody leaves the left lane for one reason or another, and there's the drivers who come down and just cut in, and it's like, come on,
I can't
we're all
stand that.
doing the right thing here. We're all just waiting. Really, you're going to do that?
Monash is the killer for that at that Hawthorn exit of all places.
Bulleen Road. What road is it?
Toorak Road?
Because we're all doing the right thing, and
Yeah, I know.
you think I should open my door and stop them going, but no, I won't
Well, can
do
I
that.
ask you, John? Because we all have done the right thing, but I put
all
my
have.
hand up. I've done the wrong thing too. I've been that person once. Have you been that person?
Yeah, I'm in a run.
Have you ever been that person?
You can cut some slack
Yeah.
if you
Once a year, you're allowed
if you've
to
got
do
to get
that.
to a hospital,
once
if you're
a year.
actually get to a
Okay,
hospital, I can
okay.
understand it. There's that. What else? Oh, when the kids don't fill up the water filter in the fridge at home. And you get up because I'm now in the habit, because of Kokoda, I started getting into a fitness regime, so I'm doing that every morning now, and I've got to hydrate after. And you get up in the morning, it's like you filled it up the night before, and they've filled up their water bottles, right? But haven't filled the thing up, so I get up.
Yeah, that's irritating.
I know, that is very frustrating.
Not much,
No.
but that'll be the second example.
You did very well there, because it's whenever it's like people that don't replenish things. If you actually, I'm getting frustrated of a past time at a previous job, like the person that leaves that much milk in the fridge and doesn't replace it. Anyway, we'll go off topic. Actually, we'll also get you. Yeah, Sammy, can you bring over that too as well? So we've got a few gifts for you.
You didn't have to get me a gift. It's been absolute delight.
No, it's on behalf of our wonderful friends and partners. So this is also a new one of ours.
So Milkman, they're a leader in men's grooming products, known for their high quality natural ingredients. So John, you'll be going home with the natural deodorant by Milkman and a men's fragrance, perfect for staying fresh.
Thank you, Milkman.
Yeah.
Thank you. You didn't have to, but it's been absolute delight.
Well, we've got some things off air too. We'll quickly run through them. So Musashi, you're into your fitness at the moment. They're sending you home with some protein bars.
Show that to the camera, actually.
Yeah,
there we go.
Yeah, there you go.
Beautiful, love that.
So Musashi very kindly sending you home with some protein bars. A couple of them I noticed. They're not on the market yet.
Aren't they?
So they're a little exclusive for you, John.
Okay.
Yeah, so you can taste test them. And then Fleet Plan Hire, maybe you can talk about them too.
Oh yeah, Fleet Plan Hire and Amy Wright's partner. They're amazing. But they also love their golf. So even though they're probably the number one when it comes to earth moving and everything construction, they've got a few of their own little golf accessories that they'll be sending John home
Tees,
with.
balls, gloves.
Do you play golf?
Yeah.
I haven't played in many years,
Yeah.
just timing wise.
Yeah.
I can't imagine
Yeah.
you'd have much time. Well,
No.
Donald
It
Trump
all
seems
went
to
downhill when the kids came. Couldn't do anything.
Well, yeah.
God love 'em.
So we've got thank you to all our wonderful sponsors and providing you with that goodie bag, John.
Yeah.
But for you, thank you so much. We said to Georgie before, it was a bit of a... It was one of those Hail Mary emails. We'll just see if there's an opportunity. And Ben and you were so gracious to give us some time today. So we understand we're probably not the normal platform that you appear on, but for us personally, we really appreciate it.
Well, look, can I just say thank you too? And it's been one of the most enjoyable chats I've had, because I don't get opportunities to do this very often because a lot of it's short and fast in media. But look, congratulations to you because if you don't mind me saying, you're debating a lot of issues, not just politics, but I know a whole range of things, sport and the rest, and culture discussions. But just the way you elicit the discussion and work through it carefully, I think is just really commendable. So
We appreciate it. Is there anything you'd like to leave our audience
sign
with?
off on something for our
well,
audience.
look, I hope our audience feels that they can be a part of democracy and be a part of politics. And it doesn't matter if someone's watching and they come from a family that has no political connections, don't let that be a discouragement or a deterrent. You can always get involved and the country will be better off for more people getting involved.
Love it. Great way to end.
Appreciate it, John.
Pleasure.